Forbes Books presents Sustainable Leadership and Disruptive Growth with David Radlow. Transformation for a new and better world. Here's David.
Welcome back to my conversation with social entrepreneur and co-founder of the Concussion Legacy Foundation, Dr. Chris Nowinski. Chris, in part one, you talked about how you got here and why you dedicated your life to creating a nonprofit organization that's tackling the sports concussion crisis through education, policy, and research. We're in the middle of football season, and as we discussed, things have really come a long way in your field. Did you ever imagine that one day pro and collegiate leagues would institute concussion protocols and the NFL would even set up medical tents? And what do you think has been done to improve things for young people that play organized contact sports?
Great question. So the only way to answer that question is to really bifurcate who we're talking about. So, and I draw the line with what we're doing for adults and what we do for kids, right? Because in a lot of these sports, we still have kids doing the same things as adults. Where they don't have any resources like tents on the sidelines, they don't have doctors. So at the NFL level, when I watch it, I know that they're getting as good of medical care as you can. I know that as an advisor to the NFL Players Association for the last decade, we've told them everything we know, and the players have made choices to make the game safer. But it still has danger because that's how they make a living. And so I don't have a problem with watching the NFL. I know that players are still getting CT. I know that a significant percentage of them playing out there have CT already. But these are, in theory, adults, doing a dangerous job to support their family, and that's okay. We do that, military, first responders, those are dangerous jobs too. They don't get paid nearly as much. I do take issue with people who say they are informed of the risks because not every player is. They haven't, a lot of them avoid talking to, none of them talk to us. I think they're all sort of scared to know because the other problem is with football is that you don't become aware of the risks until the end of your career, right? So you sign up as a child because it's cool and you already have years of exposure before your brain's evolved enough to understand what CT could even be. And so when people say I would do it again or I'm happy to do it, the other conversation I have off the record with people is, well, geez, I've already put in 15 years. I might as well get paid a few $1 million and for a few more, right? So they're sort of caught in this, very few people have the wherewithal of their financial security to walk away before the last check is, before they've wound up their funding. So then, on the kids side, the NFL is basically fine. Like you let the players drive the bus here. But when it comes to kids, like I'm completely uncomfortable with kids before high school playing tackle football. We've led efforts to make sure it never happens. It shouldn't happen. It's just not fair to the kids. We've gotten heading banned in soccer before 11. I think it should be banned till 14 though. Checking in hockey was raised from 11 to 13. It probably should be 15. But those changes are being made. We now have required concussion education for everybody. The big low-hanging fruit have been taken care of. But with that said, we got new young kids every year. It's still very hard to diagnose concussions, even for doctors. And so we have to just be vigilant. I think the argument with most sports in America right now is we still have to be vigilant. We have to put in the time. We have to prioritize this as an issue. We have to remember that sports are great and kids need to do it for the health and bonding and social parts. But no kid should have their brain ruined or impaired through these games. And so we have to do everything we can to prevent preventable concussions and head impacts and everything else we can do to recognize and respond appropriately to minimize the damage that occurs. And it's a much higher priority than it used to be. It could probably still be a higher priority for people, but it's way better than it was. But I'll also add one of the things that we've done, because I think sort of in your question, it's the same idea that we all have, like, can you watch the NFL as somebody who's enlightened to this and still enjoy it? Is that we know there's sort of people are uncomfortable with that sometimes, but you and I are, both grew up football fans and are still football fans. A few of our board members sort of recognize their reluctance to watch or their sort of emotional stress of watching and trying to enjoy as they used to enjoy. And so they came up with a concept sort of based on carbon offsets we're calling concussion tributes, which is the idea that if you love football, but you're uncomfortable with the risks that the players are taking, and you want to be part of the solution, a lot of people are now making weekly gifts during the NFL season to the foundation so that they can feel better watching, know when they see that hard hit that they've made a donation that's going to help support the research that will provide solutions for these players down the road. And I think that's a really interesting concept. So the Concussion Tributes thing is sort of an exciting way for people to stay fans, but also contribute to the solutions.
We made mention in the NFL Hall of Famer Brett Favre as part of a campaign with the Concussion Legacy Foundation urging parents to have their kids play flag football until age 14. It's been one hell of a disruptive discourse, and word has it that the elephant in the room, Chris, is that it would not be good for NFL pro-line goods in watching favorite teams to eliminate contact football. And some parents say that it goes too far in infringing on parental rights. Is that too of a direct correlation? And can you scientifically explain the benefits of why 14?
Yeah, that's a big and loaded question. So I actually have to pull out my notebook and make sure I hit all the areas. So the reason we started promoting no tackle until 14 was based on a decade of work of studying hundreds of football players' brains and finding this correlation between years played and developing CTE, right? So, and when I say, I mentioned earlier, your odds go up 20 to 30% each additional year you play. That's actually very close to how much your odds of lung cancer go up each year you smoke. So again, that analogy is that understanding of exposure and a dose response result with an outcome is driving this. And so if that is true, and the best evidence we have today says this is true, and then everyone knows, the NFL players, especially like the Hall of Famers, like everyone we've studied has had CTE. Kids are just high school football players, fewer of them have it. But we announced earlier this year, 16 of our first 65, so about a quarter of our high school football players that we've studied have had CTE, but all but one of them started before 12, right? Sort of that feeding that trend of 20 to 30%. But if that's true, the only way to reduce risk of CTE is to have fewer years played. The only logical way to reduce fewer years played is to wait until kids are older. And basically, we do this everywhere in life, right? Whether it's driving cars or smoking or drinking, it's all about not exposing kids to these risk factors. And then again, most other sports beyond American football have kid versions that are much, much safer, like no heading in soccer, no checking ice hockey, no tackle rugby. But football is a different and unique sport in the sense that it's basically a capitalist enterprise. There is no governing body of youth football that controls the game. It's a bunch of companies like Pop Warner, American Youth Football, who are recruiting kids because it's a business. And there's no floor to how young you can put a helmet on a child and ask them to tackle other children hundreds of times. The only reason that you have to wait till 4 or 5 to have kids start to play tackle football is because before that, they can't remember the plays and line up. But so there's been no thought to when is this a good idea for kids. We also learned that from putting sensors in their helmets that even though they look like they're not hitting hard, because of biomechanical reasons, kids are, and you know this from your own kids, have big heads relative to their bodies when they're young. Your head is nearly full size by the time you're 6 years old, but your body is about 1/5 of what it's going to be. And so you're basically an orange on a toothpick, to reference a movie that some might remember. And so it doesn't take much speed and running to cause a ton of energy to go in your brain. So you're basically, the kids are hitting as hard as high school or college kids. So all that being true, then the question becomes, well, if we don't want kids to get CTE, and we don't think it's fair for kids to get CTE, what's the only way we can change this? And it's to say, all right, you can't play. In talking to the youth football leagues, there's actually a quote in a roundtable we had that the head of Pop Warner said, look, even if I believed it wasn't safe to do till 10 or 12, if I made that a rule, all the kids in that neighborhood would then be recruited by my competition that could move into town and say, hey, those guys are only going to play flag till 10. They're weak. we'll start you up at 5. And once they grab all those kids from 5 to 10, they'll keep them as they get older, and they'll basically put the other leagues out of business. So no one can, they're all caught in this. Nobody can make this change independently. So it'd have to be everyone together, and therefore the only way we can do it is legislation. So I think we're trending towards, as the research grows, everybody buying into this is better for kids. And the only question is, how do we execute this strategy? And if we actually just knocked 3 years off everyone's career when they're a child, we would cut CT rates in future football players by 50%. You cut 6 years out, you're talking cutting it by 75%. Like, that's an enormous number. And the only things that people are defending now are the idea that, well, we don't have enough kids with CTE. And therefore, we can't. There are actually people who will argue that because we don't have a 10-year-old with CT, kids are immune to CT. And of course, that's ridiculous. We also don't have 10-year-olds with lung cancer or even 18-year-olds with lung cancer because it takes a while for this disease to develop. It doesn't mean that it's okay to smoke at 10 and then you just stop, right? So that argument doesn't hold. And any other idea of parental rights, like that is an important question for our culture. And it is an argument that we know there's always two sides to, right? Like, I am a big believer that you shouldn't be allowed to abuse your child, right? Like, if you punched your child in the head 300 times a year, you'd go to jail. But if you let some other kid put a helmet on and basically put the same energy in your kid's brain, but it's a sport and it's not called a punch, that's legal. And from the brain's perspective, they can't tell whether it's dad punching him in the head or another kid tackling them. It's still brain damage. And so I would argue we shouldn't do that. I'm sure when we instituted minimums originally for kids driving cars, some people said, my kid can drive at 10, they can handle it, or I need my kid to be able to drive at 12 because we're on a farm and we're in a remote place and blah, blah, blah. And everyone has their arguments for why they should have it their way. And I just think generally as a culture, we've trended towards kids need protection from the government, because not every parent understands what they're doing to their child. And their kid definitely doesn't understand until they're 18, which is an age we've all decided as a culture is the age of consent. So from my perspective, I'm fine advocating for bans on this issue because the science is there, the history is there of how we handle kids. And the other side is the benefits are zero towards playing tackle versus flag. Football is not a sport where you even accrue skills besides maybe quarterback. Right, someone who played, it's about being big, strong, and fast. And so you can run around, don't tackle until a certain age, and then you can start to tackle. So that's why we do what we do. There's also arguments of the brain is still developing when kids are young. There's a magical time happening between 9 and 12 where you're doing synaptic pruning and different things are happening that it's a bad time to rattle that cage thousands of times. You're talking about at high school football, you have protections from state educators, while youth football is private enterprise. So you have experienced coaches who are getting paid, who have oversight from educators, and you don't at the younger levels. And then all those biomechanical reasons. So there's just a zillion reasons why it's a bad idea. And the reality is we have way too many teenagers we've diagnosed with CT, some that'll come out in the future that will probably shock people to change again.
Okay, Chris, thanks for that explanation to a very difficult topic. Can you kindly talk about the people that have worked with you along to get you there, including Dr. Robert Cantu, Dr. Ann McKee, Dr. Robert Stern, and the entire team of advisors and collaborators that are passionate people that drive everything, processes and strategy and research to make your organization the tremendous success that it is?
I would be happy to. Thank you. We are, we have a growing staff. Really, so much of our work is done by volunteers like you. As a member of our Boston Advisory Board, thank you very much for all that you have been doing, including giving us a platform like this to talk about it, or writing about us in your book. My co-founder of the foundation is Dr. Robert Cantu, who was my treating doctor and who did open up my eyes to the big concussion problem. And part of CLF's origin story is that I wanted to take what Dr. Cantu taught me to everybody else. To build the brain bank, we searched for the person who was the right scientist to lead this research, and we were very lucky to be introduced to Dr. Ann McKee by Dr. Bob Stern, who said, based on your goals, Dr. Ann McKee is the right person, both as a scientist but also as a human, to lead this work, because you need to have courage to take on people like the NFL and take on all the naysayers and all the drama. You need to be a great scientist, and you need to care about people. This is really about caring about what happens to people and their families. Dr. Stern, who helped, conceive of this brain bank and this idea, the idea was then he would lead our clinical research of how do you diagnose this, how do you treat this. And he's done an amazing job of changing our understanding of the disease, but also getting all the grants that happened because of the brain bank work. And from the National Institutes of Health, he's now leading these massive longitudinal studies to try to diagnose it and treat it and to come up with a clinical diagnostic criteria. So just been lucky to meet the right people who care and are also brilliant scientists and are doing it in an ethical manner and also are willing to stick to it. Like we're now, we met 14 years ago, and basically the choice we gave is like, will you commit your career to this? And they switched from Alzheimer's as their primary focus to CTE, even though there wasn't any funding back then for it. Then beyond that, I've got an amazing board of directors. The current president of our board is Peter Carfagna, who leads the Harvard Sports Law Program, the former general counsel for IMG, and is a former Harvard football player. And he's a guy who cares about this. We got this amazing, brilliant board who's helped us navigate the complexities you can imagine behind the scenes. We've got regional advisory boards of people who are passionate about this. We've got medical advisory boards. We've got our new veterans advisory board of these generals and people who've served who are passionate about this. Like we owe CLF success to literally hundreds and hundreds of people who are doing this just because they believe in the cause and they recognize that this is one of those moments in time where we can change, the course of the planet, right? Like we can change sports forever. We can change research forever and medical care forever to actually help people in a way that we're seeing in our lifetime and we're seeing very fast results from. So I've been lucky to just continue to get connected to and identify people who are very talented, very smart, very generous, who allow this work to continue.
Chris, would you mind commenting on your most recent initiative in the UK under the leadership of Dr. Adam White, sports and coaching sciences lecturer at Oxford Brookes University, dedicated to advancing CTE research? And could you be kind enough to let us know what all that excitement's about?
So we started working with Dr. Adam White when he was leading an effort in the UK to get rid of tackle rugby, compulsory tackle rugby before 14. At some schools, you're required to play tackle rugby. And he thought that was an ethical problem for children. Every 2 years, we do what we call a family huddle, where we invite all of our brain donor families to get together with our team and our scientists to learn how donating their mostly men, your father's, son, brother's brain, and now we're getting more mothers, daughters, to learn how that, how their brain donation from 10 years ago, 5 years ago, last year is leading to new discoveries, new research. And it gives us the opportunity to get together to thank them, but also build community among those who've suffered in a similar way. So he came to that to actually start interviewing what it was like for the children of fathers with CTE, what their experience was like, which is going to yield these amazing studies of just how terrible it is. And then he said, I believe everything CLF's doing. Can we do this in the UK, because the UK needs this? And so we weren't aggressively looking to expand, but he was the right scientist and it was the right time. And so basically part of the strategy is not only is it still about recruiting the top scientists from around the world to get in on CT research, and part of that means we have to prove this is a problem in their country, and that means starting a brain bank. So we started this brain bank led by Dr. Gabe DeLuca at Oxford University. We'll build the cases. We'll especially find, they don't have any young cases of CT in the UK. We're going to prove those exist. And then the idea is, can we use that not only for this long-term trajectory of diagnosis and cure, but also in the short term, can we change the culture of sports there? And why this is good for CLF US is the other thing that I'm learning from doing this work for so long is that we can very quickly get to a place in the world where no kids are exposed to repetitive head impacts before 14, then maybe it'll be 16, maybe 18, whatever we decide. But this minimum age to get exposed to CT needs to be a global priority, right? It's our best chance to prevent this disease. But if you look at each sports ecosystem, everyone's a little scared to move by themselves, right? U.S. soccer was briefly in an international laughingstock for banning heading before 11. Now they look like geniuses because the UK has followed them. But football, soccer is religion there. But if we get like American football is going to fight us. But what if we got rugby to get rid of tackling before 14? Then American football would probably have to. So it's sort of this global strategy of American football is an American game, but soccer and rugby are global games. And if we can convince those sports to change, we can probably tip the whole world over so that every sport basically has a kid version that's safe. Because right now, the kids' versions are primarily meant to look like the pro versions, and that's a mistake. And so, the international expansion is going to accelerate all this stuff, and it's going to help people in the UK, but I think it's going to help the people around the world because we'll start to move as one unit together.
Let's talk money. Ironically, the former president of NFL Properties who created NFL Pro Line and accelerated their merchandise growth, John Bella, was on this podcast. He is famous for stating, "Vision without money is insanity. You can't accomplish what you did without funding as well as what you want to do. You were the founding force of the nonprofit Concussion Legacy Foundation at Boston University CTE Center. How'd you get it done financially? And what are the fundraising processes and the challenges that deserve funding in the future?"
Great question. So we were insane at the beginning, right? So the reality is when we started the foundation, I knew nothing about fundraising, had no money. And basically when I went to Boston University to start the brain bank, what I told Ann McKee was, I can get you the brains. I'll do that. I'm going to be making these calls all day pro bono, but I don't have any funding for you. Can you get the funding? And so she has been very smart in how she's been able to use some seed funding from other research to then turn into a giant machine that perpetually gets funded by the VA and NIH because it's producing results. So the brain bank has been funded by her work. For the foundation, I basically was a volunteer at the beginning doing this on the side while I had a healthcare consulting job because I was passionate about it. And eventually when we started proving success and I also started learning how to raise money, we were able to raise money primarily through philanthropists who just cared about it and recognized the issue. And since then, we've just been slowly trying to build a better fundraising operation because our work needs to be funded. And I need to hire talented people. We need to be able to, invest in things like shooting PSAs with Brett Favre or building, these surveillance networks and promoting Project Enlist or, traveling around the world trying to convince people to stop hitting children in the head. And so we're still primarily funded through philanthropy. It's split now, getting more and more split between just individual philanthropists, corporate supporters, although most of the corporate support is from the leadership. We're not because our issue is controversial and because it makes the NFL or the NHL angry, we're not sort of the social giving that corporations do. We don't fit into that. And then the other part that's been a huge growth force is grants. When we started, we knew early on there were no foundations in the world that supported concussions or CT work because that just had never happened before. And so we've sort of had to wait for foundations to realize that this fits into their work. And so lately we've been doing a great job of getting foundations to support the work because we've proven the track record for success. We've proven this is a public health issue. And so it's happening. So at the beginning, it was really hard. It's getting easier, but just because we've proven our success, but it's still a battle. We're still, we'll raise about $2.5 million this year. We need to be much larger to really. We're the largest nonprofit working in concussion or CT spaces, and so we need to do more to serve the people we're trying to serve. And so, a lot of my job is about how do I do better to raise money? How do I identify resources that are there, and then get to the process of convincing people that this is a worthwhile investment. And, the reality is it is, but it's new. It's still so new that there's not as many opportunities as there are for things like cancer and other things that are out there.
Last question. How can people help you, Chris?
Thank you for that question. There are a lot of ways to engage with what we're doing. The simplest way, if you had one action item, would be go to concussionfoundation.org and sign up for something, whether it's our newsletter or whether it's to pledge to donate your brain or whether it's the clinical research registry or whether it's to bring Team Up, Speak Up to your school. Get engaged and become part of the team, because everybody has a role to play in solving this problem and in advancing our mission. So if you're interested in research and long-term effects, if you're an ex-athlete, you can get involved by participating in studies. And actually, in a month, we're going to be starting a huge study I need to recruit 5,000 ex-athletes for that's online. So please sign up for our registry so I have you for that. Then it's, if you've got kids playing sports or you're an athlete, sign up for some of our education programs so that we can help your kids be safer and bring our programs to you. The other big thing is always fundraising. If you believe in what we're trying to accomplish and you review our work to see the success we've had, you are welcome to make a contribution. And I will thank you for it, because we can't do this work without you. But the reality is, this is there's a lot of sweat equity in this, and there's a lot of ways to contribute. And so, if this is something that makes you passionate and you get excited, or if you've seen somebody suffer from this stuff, go to concussionfoundation.org, sign up, and let's get to work.
Thanks a lot for coming on the program. We really appreciate it.
No, thanks, David. Really a pleasure to talk to you, and thanks for everything you do for the foundation.
To connect with David, go to davidradlow.com. David's book, Principles of Cartel Disruption, Accelerate and Maximize Performance, is now available wherever books are sold. This has been Sustainable Leadership and Disruptive Growth with David Radlow, a presentation of Forbes Books.